And a top of the morning to you here on St. Patrick's Day, March 17th, a Tuesday here. And that was a song from the show The River Dance, my song of the day. That will also go along with something that we'll play here at the end. But Riverdance, big Irish step dancing show for any of you guys involved with Irish step dancing. This was a song that I remember being played at Mr. Miles's wedding in Galway 2 summers ago, and did our best rendition of step dancing, Mr. Miles and I. So hopefully everyone's wearing some green today, a little shamrock. We have St. Joseph's Day on Thursday, March 19th, so I'll put together some Italian songs for Thursday maybe. But nonetheless, we pick up with where we left off yesterday, and certainly this idea of aggression. All right, these brutal dictators like Hitler and Stalin and the rise of Mussolini have left Europe on edge, and obviously looking to change the course of history for all of Europe in the years to come. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, yesterday we had left off talking about three major dictators embodying a series of pretty much similar governments with this idea of totalitarian states. You have Stalin in the Soviet Union, you have Mussolini embracing fascism in Italy, and obviously Adolf Hitler, who begins to embody the National Socialist Party, but as we refer to it, or as at least Hitler referred to it as, the Nazi Party. As far as Hitler goes, of these major three, Hitler probably gets the most name recognition associated with these leaders during World War II, even though Stalin is just as brutal as Adolf Hitler, okay, whose beliefs for his party is definitely centered around racism, okay, this idea that the Germans were the master race, that in order to bring them back to prominence, Germany needed to go back to its roots, create an empire, and the scapegoats for their loss in World War I were the Jews. And as we'll begin to see throughout the chapter, the Nazi labor camps become something that is associated very much with the horrors of World War II. Now, one thing that also Hitler associates himself with the Nazi Party is the symbol of the Nazi Party, which was famously a swastika. Now, when you think of the swastika pictured here on the next slide, you probably think of the Nazi Party, okay, similar to how it looks here. Okay, what you would have, oh, that's probably the wrong color. Even blues, that's pretty good. Okay, for the Nazi flag, typically red with a white circle, and then inside a black swastika, kind of these interlocking, sometimes referred to as a crooked cross. But the reality is, in ancient times, this symbol was a sign of good luck. It was a sign of hopefully good fortune. And this was used widely throughout the beginning of the 1920s. So you even see here Coca-Cola. Okay, that is not something in Germany. This is something you can even see here. The swastika talking about selling fruits in California. Okay, so it's not as though California embodied the swastika. Even on this slide, if you look closely, this is a coin or a pendant for the Boy Scouts, okay? But obviously with the Nazi takeover of Germany and the popularity of the Nationalist Social Party and embodying this symbol, the swastika today, and certainly during the 1930s and onward, is most associated with the Nazi Party. All right, so one of the kind of something new as far as these dictators and the rise of these nations during the 20th century, we also have to look at the impact of militarism in Japan. Okay, Japan too, like any other European country and like the United States, has been affected economically by the Great Depression. And although this was a country that during the beginning part of the 20th century was open to the idea of democratic rule and democracy, with the failing economy of the Great Depression, many military leaders were pressuring for there to be a military takeover of the government. And that's exactly what is going to happen. The main argument behind these military generals was that for Japan as an island nation, they needed more space. Okay, they needed materials for their booming industry, they needed raw materials, obviously, more farmland, and the way to do that was to go into Asia and take over land. And that's exactly what a country like Japan is going to wind up doing. What we see here in 1936 is the rise, although in the family name, Hirohito, okay, will be the emperor of Japan, who will lead this new militaristic government into the 20th century. And just similar to Germany and the Nazi Party, this was also a new government that preached about racism. This idea that Japan was superior to other Asian countries, as well as other races, meaning non-Asians, and they were willing to do whatever they could in order to bring that rise to power, at least in Asia, and more importantly, to be a pillar of strength in the Pacific. Okay, so Japan is on the rise, Germany is on the rise, the Soviet Union is on the rise, Italy is on the rise. This is in the 1930s, really a perfect storm for there to be an outbreak, but no one could have ever imagined as to what was going to happen with the beginning of World War II. As early as the beginning of the 1930s, we really begin to see this military aggression taking place through a number of different countries. Yesterday, we defined aggression as those warlike acts between one country against another. But the big thing is without cause, and that's exactly what's going to happen with Japan. In the early 1930s, specifically 1931, without the permission of the elected organized government at that time, the Japanese military is going to act on its own accord to seize land that is known as Manchuria. So if you take a look at this map here in this area, okay, in relation to Japan, just north of North and South Korea today, okay, it is a part of northeastern China. And for the Japanese, this was a huge land grab on their accord. Now, when you think about it, 1930s, the League of Nations was around, which was supposed to stop aggression like this. However, they took no action. They did not see this to be a huge issue and didn't really want to make a mountain out of an anthill, so to speak. Now, obviously, looking back on it, this is something that potentially the League of Nations could have stepped in and stopped, and maybe for whatever reason, certain events wouldn't have happened the way they played out. By 1937, Japan continued their aggression by the time the military had taken over the government on a little small city just west of just west of Shanghai. So Nanjing is probably, I know this map, I wanted to show you where Manchuria was in reference to Japan. Nanjing is probably right around here, just west of Shanghai, and for 6 weeks, the Japanese military not only attacked but pillaged this particular city. In the assault, it is estimated that around 250,000 civilians and prisoners of war had been massacred. 250,000, that's 250,000 people. And this is something that's happening even before World War II even begins. So take that into consideration as well. So the Chinese-Japan dynamic, or I should say the China-Japan dynamic during this time period in the 1930s, it's a relationship that is in shambles. And with Japan's confidence growing and their militaristic action, it sets the stage for what is to happen once World War II certainly breaks out. Now, while everything is going on in Japan, Italy too is looking to get in on the fold as far as using this aggression. And Italy's aggression, interestingly enough, is nowhere really in Europe, going back to the old Roman Empire idea that we had made mention yesterday of Mussolini kind of, extreme nationalism, a time when, Rome was so powerful and had its cultural hold on the rest of Europe. Instead, Italy goes after Ethiopia, interestingly enough. Now, Italy, as you can see here on this map, did have some territorial claims in the eastern part of Africa. And essentially what is going to happen, particularly here and up here, is that Mussolini is going to want to take more land in Africa for Italy to bring Italy back into a sense of prominence due to their land expansion. So, in what was known as the Second Italo-Ethiopian War, that technically took place from 1935 to 1937, Italian forces will face off against the Ethiopian military. And although, technically speaking, the Ethiopians outnumbered the Italians, the fact that they did not have, the Ethiopian military did not have much of a technological support like the Italians did. Just looking at some statistics, the Ethiopian army was known to have 4 tanks during this war, whereas Italy had 795 tanks. When you think about aircrafts, that is going to play a part during this war, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on in the chapter. The Ethiopian military had 13 in comparison to Italy that had 595. From 1935 to 1941, it's estimated that the Ethiopians, military and civilians included, lost over 250,000 people. So you have everything that's going on in Asia. You got what's going on here in Africa. Now, where is the League of Nations? Okay, the League of Nations is very hesitant to respond here. Okay, the Ethiopia's emperor, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing this, Haile Selassie, I believe, appealed for aid, okay, by sending in a little bit of help to stop Mussolini's army, but the League of Nations was hesitant, and even Britain and France. They didn't really want to get dragged into war. They didn't want Ethiopia to become like the powder keg and have to declare war on Italy because of everything that was going on financially in France and Great Britain at this time. So here is another example of a war that breaks out. It's a complete over a land grab, and Europe is very slow. The League of Nations is very slow to answer any of the concerns as to what was going on in Africa here. Now, the German aggression is quite interesting because it became way too predictable. And for Adolf Hitler, who's sitting in charge of Germany, who's vowing to the German people with this new Nazi party that he is going to look to unite all German-speaking people throughout Europe, is going to act in defiance of the Treaty of Versailles because he felt as though that by the mid-1930s, the rest of Europe was not going to do anything about it. Okay, so one of the things that he decided to do was build up his military. And by building up his military, he turned Germany into a wartime producing, although they weren't involved in any sort of war at this time, a war-producing industry where they are manufacturing guns and tanks and planes and submarines. And while he is building up his military, he is also looking to kind of test the waters a little bit. Okay, it's kind of like in the summer, and I know we're sitting here in March, but let's think ahead to the summer months, and we go over, maybe we have a pool in our backyard, and sometimes you dip your foot in the water to see how cold it is, and that's what Hitler's going to do with Europe. He's tipping his foot in the water a little bit because he wants to see if Europe, particularly France and Great Britain, are going to respond in any sort of way. So by 1936, in defiance of the Treaty of Versailles, Adolf Hitler is going to send troops into the Rhineland region. Now, the Rhineland, and you'll see here on the map on the next slide, is an area pretty much in western Germany, but it was supposed to be unoccupied by the Germans. It falls right on the France-Germany borderline. And while he sends troops into the Rhineland to take it over, the rest of Europe does nothing about it. Okay, so in 1936, it's kind of dipping his foot into the water, nothing happens. 2 years later, in 1938, Hitler again is on the move. This time, he's sending troops into Austria, okay, to occupy Austria, which was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire during World War I. We know how their role during the war in their relationship with Germany, and still, France and Great Britain, the United Nations do nothing, the League of Nations do nothing because they are afraid as to what would come about if they were actually to do something. As early as the spring of 1938, Hitler also was interested in what was known as the Sudeten region or the Sudetenland, which was actually part of Czechoslovakia at this point. And the reason as to why he was interested was because there were a number of German-speaking people that lived there, and his point was to help Germany expand by taking over this territory. However, by this time, kind of after the Rhineland and the occupation of Austria, and now with this, the Czechoslovakia, the government actually reaches out to France and Great Britain to say, hey, listen, this guy's talking about taking over part of our country. We need your help. And guys like Neville Chamberlain, who was the Prime Minister of England at this time, or I should say Great Britain rather, said, well, there's really nothing we can do. And his whole premise is he wants to avoid war at all costs. Okay, but finally they agree that something needs to be done. And the leaders of Germany, led by Hitler, Neville Chamberlain of Great Britain, and the Prime Minister of France all get together in Munich, Germany, to discuss what can we do to stop or to appease Adolf Hitler. Okay, now when you think about it, what does the word appease mean? There's a lot of functional definitions, but to appease somebody means to allow something, to pacify, to satisfy someone's demands. And that is essentially what is going to happen here at Munich. Okay, together, Great Britain and France basically tell Hitler, listen, you got to stop. However, this little land dispute over the Sudetenland isn't that big of a deal. However, we will allow you to have it, but that's it. Okay? We do not want to see you have any sort of land grabs moving forward. Okay? So essentially, they are giving into the demands. They are appeasing this policy of appeasement. This is very important, appeasement. They allow Germany to occupy the Sudetenland, and in return, Hitler says, all right, well, I'm done. Okay, I'm occupying the Rhineland. Thank you very much. I'm occupying parts of Austria. Thank you very much. Now I'm occupying the Sudetenland. I'm good. And Neville Chamberlain, one of the signers of what becomes known as the Munich Pact, famously says that this peace treaty, this agreement, is a peace for our time, that he has helped to navigate the idea of avoiding war at all costs. And just when Chamberlain thinks he has it all figured out, and just as Hitler says that he's done and just wants the Sudetenland, 6 months later, the joke's on Chamberlain and the rest of Europe, because Hitler had no intentions of stopping. This policy of appeasement is not working, and by the 6 months later, by the end of 1938, the Germans now occupy all of Czechoslovakia, with the government folding to now a German-occupied government. So within a few short years, a country that was supposed to be handcuffed with the difficulties of the war reparations and what the Treaty of Versailles was set up and the League of Nations set up to avoid wars has fallen asleep at the wheel. Europe as we know it has been flipped upside down, and now Great Britain and France are kind of left to fend for themselves with a growing German empire, with a fascist state in Italy, and certainly a tremendous amount of concern. So within a few short years, Germany has expanded, a country that was supposed to be handcuffed by the Treaty of Versailles and everything. Look at what Germany was in 1935. It's the dark purple here. Okay, annexation meaning what they have added. Okay, Czechoslovakia, the entire country, the Sudetenland, which was a part of Czechoslovakia, the Rhineland region, Austria. Okay, Germany is seemingly grown overnight. And for Italy, too, okay, the map doesn't show the annexation for Italy, so to speak, because I guess I can't really move this map. No, okay, you see Albania, okay, they did add a little bit of Albania. I'm not really sure as to what that island was, so to speak, but nonetheless, Europe has been completely transformed, okay, and this is a huge concern, as I mentioned on the previous slide, for France and Great Britain. So we're going to leave off here, all right, because now we got to check in to see, well, what is the United States' take on all this? Okay, everything that has happened up to this point is obviously a point of concern in Europe, but where does the United States fall into the equation? So this is a pre-recorded lesson. The idea was today to introduce conferences, so hopefully that has worked out well. Okay, and based off of that, we'll determine, put together a schedule when we will be conferencing. For this week, I don't foresee it being every day, maybe 2 or 3 times this week, but moving into next week, maybe we will do conferencing every day instead of the Explain Everything lessons. But again, this is unprecedented times here, so you guys being flexible with me and kind of looking for your feedback at some point, I definitely want to try to cater to whatever you guys are more comfortable with doing. So Hopefully everyone's doing well. All right, your homework assignment has been posted in Schoology based off today's lesson. So if you can answer those few questions and get it back to me for the start of tomorrow's class. And again, like always, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to shoot me an email. All right, I've been trying to get back to you guys' emails as quickly as possible. I will say email's the best way to get in contact with me. Some of you have messaged me through Schoology. Sometimes in Schoology, I won't see the notification for a few minutes. Email, it pops right up on my phone or my computer here. So I think email's the best way for right now to stay in contact when we are offline, so to speak, not conferencing and not within our time frame for class. Alrighty, so I hope everyone has a very happy St. Patrick's Day. Wear some green today at home as you go through your classes. And to sign out, I think we are all in need of a little bit of a smile here today with everything going on. So by the Irish tenors, let's sign out to When Irish Eyes Are Smiling. All right, guys, talk to you tomorrow.